The room was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of stillness that wraps around your neck like an invisible noose. In the corner, a rotary fan spun idly, creaking on every rotation like a ticking metronome, counting down to something inevitable. In the dim light of his basement apartment in Seattle, Ted sat alone on his worn-out couch, flipping through pages of a law textbook he hadn't touched in weeks. The soft hum of the radio filled the space, playing some upbeat 70s tune that felt completely out of place. He smiled, the kind of smile that made people trust him instantly. Soft eyes, a dimpled grin, calmness in the voice. That smile had gotten him a lot in life. But there was something behind that smile. Attention, a need. He closed the book, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. His mind wasn't on legal theory. It was on the girl at the library. Brown hair, slim waist. The way she looked up and caught his eye, and then quickly looked away, a little embarrassed. She was perfect. Ted stood up, stretched his arms like a man getting ready for a jog, and walked to the mirror. He stared at himself. Neat side-parted hair, crisp collar, the face of trust. He practiced the limp, slight, but enough to draw attention. A weakness, vulnerability. He picked up the plaster cast he'd made earlier that week. An old one cracked at the corner and slipped it on his arm. His right hand was wrapped tightly in a fake bandage. He was ready. Lake Sammamish State Park, July 14th, 1974. Janice Graham wasn't supposed to be here. She had promised her roommate she'd stay home and study. Finals were next week. But the sun was just too damn perfect. She figured she'd spend an hour or two lying in the sun with a book, maybe even take a dip if the water wasn't freezing. The park was crowded, filled with families grilling hot dogs, couples throwing frisbees, and kids shrieking as they chased each other through the grass. She found a quiet spot near the water, spread out her towel, and pulled her psychology textbook from her bag. She hadn't read a single page when she heard the voice. "Excuse me," the man said, cradling his arm awkwardly. "Would you mind helping me? I'm trying to get my sailboat on top of my car, but, as you can see," Janice blinked up at him. He was handsome, in a classic way, like he could be in a toothpaste ad or something. Brown hair, soft eyes, harmless. She smiled politely and nodded, sure. She never saw the inside of that Volkswagen. A week later, Detective Laura Jensen lit her third cigarette that morning as she looked over the missing persons report. 2 girls, gone from the same area, on the same day. No witnesses, no clues, just gone. She stared at the word that was starting to become a regular in her reports: Volkswagen. Someone had mentioned a man driving a tan Volkswagen Bug. That wasn't much to go on, but it was a thread. And in a case like this, threads were gold. She felt that gnawing in her gut again. Not hunger, intuition. Something was wrong here, very wrong. Nighttime, somewhere remote, somewhere cold. Ted dug quietly, his breath fogging in the cold mountain air. The soil was damp, resistant. Each shovel of dirt felt like a war, but he liked it. The ritual, the control. Behind him, in a dark tarp, the girl was still, hair tangled, skin pale in the moonlight. He didn't look at her, not now. That part was over. As he finished the shallow grave, he whispered to himself. She was kind. A moment of silence. A mocking moment. Too kind. 3 months later, Utah. Elizabeth Liz Kendall sipped her coffee and smiled at the man across from her. Ted had just told her a story about law school, something about a professor who wore the same tie every day. She laughed. He was funny, smart, a little intense, maybe, but sweet in his own way. She had met him at a political fundraiser. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in her and her daughter. What more could she ask for? She didn't know about the plaster cast. She didn't know about the late-night drives. She didn't know about the voices. Salt Lake City, October 1974. Melissa Rivers ran. She didn't remember how long or how far, just that she had to keep moving. The forest was dark, her legs scratched and bleeding from thorns, her breath coming in short, stabbing gasps. Somewhere behind her, branches snapped. He was coming. He had told her his name was Ted. He had asked for help. And when she had refused, politely, he had turned, not angry, not even frustrated, just blank. Like he was flipping a switch inside his head. She had screamed when he grabbed her, bit his arm, kicked wildly, and somehow, miraculously, she had gotten away. Now she was running through darkness, praying for light. FBI office, Quantico. The file was thick. Dozens of girls, all young, all similar in appearance, brunette, thin, part down the middle. Most had vanished without a trace. A few had been found, or what was left of them. Agent Marshall leaned back and rubbed his temples. This wasn't just a killer. This was a predator, a hunter. The word organized came to mind. He stalked, he planned, he manipulated, and worst of all, he blended in. Back in Washington, Christmas Eve. Liz watched Ted sleeping. He looked peaceful. She reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. How could a man so kind be involved in something so monstrous? Because the police had called. They had questions about his car, his whereabouts, a suspect's sketch that looked disturbingly like him. She pushed the thought away. She loved him. That had to count for something, right? Somewhere in Colorado, a frozen night. Ted stared at the lifeless body beside him. Her name had been Carol. He had whispered it before he took her life. Whispered it like a prayer. Now, snowflakes settled on her pale face. She didn't belong out here. None of them did, but they were his now. His forever. He picked up the shovel and began to dig. The snow had stopped falling by dawn. Ted sat behind the wheel of his tan Volkswagen, the windows fogged over with his breath. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, unblinking, unmoving. His eyes were glassy, detached, the kind of look you'd see in a doll or a corpse. Carol was gone, but not forgotten, never forgotten. He whispered her name once more, not with regret, but with possession. He owned her now, in a way the world would never understand. Salt Lake County Jail, March 1975. The bars clanged shut behind him. Ted stood tall, composed. Not like a man accused of kidnapping, more like a man wrongly inconvenienced. He wore his usual charm like a tailored suit, but this time, the seams were beginning to split. Detective Mike Fisher watched him from across the room. There was something off about the guy, something that went beyond words. Ted Bundy was polite, articulate, even funny. But Mike had seen enough killers to know when someone was performing. And Ted Bundy was always performing. Liz's apartment, late night. Liz sat on the bathroom floor, gripping the phone like it might bite her. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the police again. She hated herself for this. She hated that her brain was catching up to what her heart refused to believe. "I think my boyfriend. I think he might be the man you're looking for," she whispered. Silence on the line. She stared at the photo they had released, the police sketch. The hair, the eyes, the shape of the face. It was him. It had to be him. Courtroom 1976. The room buzzed with whispers. Ted walked in wearing a navy suit, a thin tie, and that same maddening smile. The press was everywhere, pens scribbling, cameras snapping. He represented himself. Of course he did. He said no one else could capture his essence like he could, and he was good. Brilliant. Even the law students watching couldn't help but admire him until they saw the photos. The black and white images of what had been left behind in the Utah woods. Bone fragments, a skull, a jaw with teeth still clenched in horror. The room went quiet. Ted's smile remained. Aspen, Colorado, June 1977. He waited until the guard took his lunch break. It was almost too easy. He slipped out the courthouse window, dropped onto the sidewalk, and vanished into the mountains. He was free for now. 5 days later, deep woods. He was tired, hungry, cold. But he was also alive. Ted moved like a shadow through the trees, surviving on candy bars and creek water. He had stolen a rifle from an empty cabin. He didn't need it for hunting, just in case someone found him. And yet, he missed the cities, the streets, the women, the game. He was a wolf in the woods, but his prey was elsewhere. Back in Florida, January 1978, the Chi Omega sorority house was asleep. It was 2:45 a.m. Ted had crossed the country undetected, like a phantom. Now, he stood in the darkness, holding a piece of firewood in one hand and a torn strip of cloth in the other. He moved silently from room to room. Margaret Bowman never saw him. Neither did Lisa Levy. By 3:15 a.m., the hallway was slick with blood. Bones shattered, teeth knocked from mouths. He didn't stay long. He never did. 2 days later, Lake City, Florida. Kimberly Leach was 12. She was last seen walking from her school to the main building. Witnesses saw a man, tall, lean, driving a beat-up orange VW Bug. That was all. No screams, no struggle, just gone. Pensacola, February 1978. Officer David Lee noticed the car first. The tags were stolen. The driver was nervous, too nervous. When he tried to cuff him, the man fought like a demon. They wrestled, rolling through mud and leaves. But in the end, David won. He dragged the man to his feet, breathless. "What's your name?" he asked. The man smiled, bruised and bloodied. "Ted. Miami, -1979. The trial was unlike anything Florida had ever seen. It wasn't just about murder, it was about performance. Ted was the main actor, the defense attorney, and the star witness. He cross-examined his ex-girlfriends, mocked the prosecution, winked at the press. But the evidence was undeniable. The bite mark on Lisa Levy's body matched his teeth perfectly. The forensic pathologist called it a perfect fit, as if fate itself had carved it into her. The jury didn't take long. Guilty, death row, Florida State Prison. Ted spent his days writing letters and charming interviewers. Women sent him nude photos, love letters, even marriage proposals. But he was rotting from the inside. The control was slipping. The mask was cracking. Some nights, he screamed in his cell. Not in fear, but in rage. Like a man trapped in a body that couldn't keep up with the monsters inside him. He confessed to more, 30 women, maybe more. He said he couldn't remember all the names. One night, final confession, he whispered to a priest. They never screamed, not the way I expected. The priest didn't respond, just held the rosary tighter. I think I was born broken, Ted added, but maybe we all are. January 24th, 1989. Outside the prison gates, a crowd gathered. They held signs, drank beer, cheered. One read, Fry Bundy Fry. At 7:16 a.m., the switch was pulled. Inside, the room filled with the scent of burning flesh. Outside, someone popped champagne. Ted Bundy was dead, but his smile remained carved into the memory of a nation forever. There was something about the silence after a scream, the way it lingered like ash in the air. Ted always noticed it. Not the act itself, not the chaos, but the silence that came afterward. That was the part he remembered, the part he craved. Florida State Prison, minus 1,989 weeks before execution. The walls were closing in, and Ted knew it. But he wore his charm like armor, still giving interviews, still spinning his narrative, never giving anyone the full truth. He didn't want to hand over control, not even in death. Reporters circled like vultures. Preachers offered salvation. Women still wrote him letters soaked in perfume. But inside, he was unraveling. He hadn't slept in 3 days. His dreams had turned violent, even for him. Not memories, not fantasies. Punishment, the dreams. He walked through forests of bodies, faces without eyes, staring from trees. Every step he took, the ground pulsed with heartbeats. Beneath the soil were arms, mouths screaming, and they all knew his name. Ted, they whispered, over and over, Ted. Washington minus 1,972 flashback. He had followed her for 3 weeks. Suzanne Mallory, 19, brunette, pre-med. He knew everything, her route to class, her favorite coffee, the book she kept in her bag but never read. She was disciplined, predictable, perfect. But something went wrong that night. He had waited by her dorm, cast on his arm, keys dropped in the bushes. "Can you help me?" he had asked. She hesitated. That moment, that tiny flickering hesitation, enraged him. He hadn't planned what came next. Not really. The scream had echoed. Someone opened a window. Lights flicked on. Too close. He dropped her. Ran. Heart pounding. Blood boiling. She survived, barely. She never spoke his name, but she remembered the smell of his breath. Present the tapes. Investigators began cataloging hundreds of hours of tape recordings. Conversations between Ted and psychologists, priests, FBI agents. Some tapes were never released to the public. One stood out. He had been asked, "How do you decide who dies?" He responded with a smile the recorder couldn't capture. "It's not about them," he said. "It's about me. It's always been about me." Pause. Death is just a punctuation mark. I write the sentence. I choose where it ends. Survivor, Kathy Kleiner. Kathy had seen him. She didn't remember the moment he entered her room, only the pressure of something heavy against her face. The taste of blood, the cold snap of bone breaking. But she woke up. She saw the outline. Tall, calm, not rushing. She played dead. It saved her life. Years later, she still heard his breathing. Not in nightmares, in silence. That hush before falling asleep. The whisper in the air. The inhale just before something terrible. She never forgot. She never forgave. The lost victims. The FBI believed he killed at least 36 women. Privately, many agents believed it was double that, maybe more. There were names that never made the news. Families who never got closure. Skeletons never recovered, like Debbie Fields. Vanished from Oregon in 1973. Her roommates said she'd gone to study at the park. She never returned. Or Maria Grant, hitchhiking in Idaho. Last seen getting into a tan bug. Or Teresa Underhill. San Diego, never officially linked to Ted, but the method, the timeline, it fit too perfectly. The monster left no fingerprints, just patterns. Liz, years later. Liz lived in Utah under a different name. She'd changed her hair, changed her life, but she hadn't changed what was inside her. Every mirror showed a man's face behind her shoulder. Every creak of the floorboards made her heart race. Every memory of his hands on her waist now made her skin crawl. She had loved a ghost, slept beside a demon, watched him kiss her daughter goodnight. She still woke screaming, even decades later. Detective Mike Fisher, interview 1992. "They always ask me the same thing," he said. What was he really like? He leaned back in his chair. "I'll tell you." Ted was empty. Not angry, not insane, just hollow, like a house that looked fine on the outside. But every room was gutted. Nothing inside but echoes. He took a long pause, and echoes can lie to you. Inside Ted's mind, final days, he began talking to shadows. Not hallucinations, not insanity, but guilt, or the closest thing he ever came to guilt. He whispered to his pillow. She cried. "I remember that." Sometimes he laughed. "She begged me not to." That made it worse. He confessed more. Murders no one asked about. Girls no one had known were missing. He named places, dates, details that chilled even the hardest men at the bureau. But not out of remorse. Out of pride, he wanted to be remembered. Florida State Prison execution, Eve. A priest sat across from him. Ted stared at the floor. "Do you believe in the devil?" he asked. The priest nodded slowly. "Do you think he's red, with horns?" "No," the priest said. "I think he smiles." Ted didn't laugh, didn't blink. He only said, "Good. Then he's proud of me." The execution revisited. The room was cold, white, sterile. He was strapped down, still calm. His eyes darted to the glass. Behind it, victims' families, reporters, guards, a minister holding a cross. He didn't speak, no last words, just a flicker in his eyes. The switch was thrown. Smoke, silence, the smell of charred skin. Some cried, some clapped. All watched, but he never really left. Even after his death, letters kept arriving. Women still fascinated by him. Some claimed he visited them in dreams. Others got tattoos of his face. Obsession lived on. Netflix specials, books, podcasts, his legacy outlived him. But behind every word, every dramatization, every dollar made off his name, there was still a girl, alone, screaming in the dark. And that scream still echoes. There are wounds that never bleed, scars that don't mark the skin. Ted Bundy left many of those. Washington -1990. A dense fog blanketed the Pacific Northwest, and Detective Angela Madsen stood at the edge of Taylor Mountain. The cold mist clung to her coat, to her eyelashes, to her thoughts. They were digging again. Another anonymous tip. Another patch of disturbed earth. By now, the ground here had become a graveyard. Unofficial, incomplete, but deeply personal. Ted had admitted to burying at least 4 women here, but no one truly believed the number ended there. And the forest, it remembered. The unearthed, she had no name, no hands, no clothes, no face, only teeth, brittle, chipped, clenched in death. Forensic analysis said she'd been dead nearly 20 years, around the time Ted was in his prime. But her DNA didn't match any active missing persons case. She was forgotten before she was even found, but she screamed loudest from the soil. Angela ordered the remains bagged. As they zipped the body, a crow cawed in the distance. A scream, low and long. Some said the forest was cursed. Angela agreed. Bundy's brother, interview, 1991. I used to think he was the smart one, Glenn said. Charming, confident. Girls liked him. Mum was proud. He took a shaky breath. I remember one Christmas. I was 10. I caught him cutting pictures out of a Sears catalogue. Women in lingerie. But he wasn't keeping them. He was burning them. He paused. There was something in his eyes, even back then. Not anger, hunger. The Psychologist's Journal, unpublished notes. Entry number 118. Patient maintains charm, even in deep introspection. Unapologetic, yet poetic. When asked if he ever felt sorry, he replied, I didn't kill them because I hated them. I killed them because I wanted to hold something beautiful forever. But beauty dies. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? Liz, visiting Taylor Mountain. She stood by a tree, scarred with initials she didn't recognize. Rain soaked her hair, ran down her cheeks like tears she had long since dried out. She whispered into the woods. How many? The trees said nothing. She looked down and saw a piece of a shoe, half buried in mud. Pink, torn, childlike. She turned and walked away, shaking. But the wind behind her whispered her name. Survivor, Cheryl Thomas. Nightmares. She remembered music. That night she had been practicing ballet. She had her headphones in, closed the blinds, locked the door. It hadn't mattered. She woke up in the hospital, her jaw shattered, her shoulder dislocated, deaf in one ear. She never danced again. But what haunted her wasn't the attack. It was the feeling that someone had watched her rehearse, learned her steps, chosen her. He hadn't picked her at random. He'd choreographed her death. Utah case reopened. Detective Carl Jennings never believed the case of Pamela Albertson had been solved. She disappeared from a laundromat in 1974. The case was closed in 76, pinned on a local drifter. But there were holes, strange details, like the mannequin head found in the dryer. The single high heel left outside the entrance. Carl reopened it in 1991 after reading Bundy's confessions. There was something in the way Ted talked about laundromats. He said, people think danger hides in alleys. But no, it hides in routines, where you feel safe. Pamela was never found, just erased. Bundy tapes, final recording. The voice was slower now, hoarse. It gets quiet in here at night, too quiet. So I talk to them, the ones I killed. I try to remember their voices, but it's hard. All I hear now is screaming, like it never stops. The recorder clicks, a long silence. Then, the scariest part is, I miss it. Not the blood, the moment before. When she looks at me and trusts me, a family's curse. The family of Donna Manson had never recovered. Her father took his life in 1980, a gun in one hand, her graduation photo in the other. Her mother was institutionalized in 85. Her younger brother, Tommy, became a social worker, dedicated to helping women escape violent partners. But he never spoke her name, not once. He kept her room exactly the same. Still dusted her dresser, still changed the sheets, still waited for her to walk back through the door. Bundy's grave, unmarked, forgotten. They cremated his body, no stone, no plaque, just ash and memory. But stories began to spread that his ashes were scattered near Taylor Mountain, that sometimes hikers heard footsteps behind them, that dogs refused to walk past certain trees. And some say, when the fog rolls in thick, you can see him. Not his face, just the outline, watching. The girl who got away, 1969. Her name was Marcy. She was 15. Ted had pulled over and offered her a ride. She got in. She remembered his smile, wide, white, warm. But halfway down the road, something changed. His eyes darkened. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. She asked to be let out. He didn't answer, so she jumped, broke her ankle, rolled into a ditch, crawled for hours. She never told anyone, until 1993, when she read an article about a man named Bundy. She looked at his picture and vomited, then screamed. Detective Angela Madsen, final report. He didn't just kill them. He erased them, stole their futures, hollowed out families. Bundy was never a man. He was a shadow, a hunger. A question that still haunts us. How many more? Back at Taylor Mountain, present day, it was quiet now. No search teams, no journalists, just fog and moss and the rustle of distant animals. But beneath the surface, bones still whispered. And somewhere, someone was still dreaming of Ted. Still fantasizing. Still idolizing the monster who smiled as he carved his name into the flesh of a nation. When the dead don't stay dead, they haunt. They live on in the whispers, in the obsessions, in the shadows of every dark corner. 1995, the rise of the true crime phenomenon. By the mid-90s, Ted Bundy's name was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It had become a cultural landmark. Books, documentaries, and film adaptations flooded the market. His trial, once broadcast as a chilling spectacle, now felt like the opening scene of a blockbuster. Every inch of his story was dissected, analyzed, romanticized. Bundy's dark charm had been immortalized in public memory, not as a warning, but as a source of fascination. The unseen legacy, there was no denying it. Bundy had become a brand. People wore his face on t-shirts, teenagers on social media, long before the explosion of TikTok, were quick to share their admiration for the mastermind behind it all. They didn't talk about the victims. They talked about him, the man who had outsmarted the law, the man who had taunted detectives, the man who had played with their lives. Somewhere in the middle of this newfound reverence, Ted Bundy found his final victory. Case study: Holly Mayfield, fan of the monster. Holly Mayfield had been a fan of true crime for as long as she could remember. She read about serial killers like others, read about pop stars. And Ted was different. Ted was the embodiment of something she couldn't explain. To Holly, he wasn't just a murderer, he was a puzzle, a riddle that needed solving. She pored over his interviews, studying his words. She watched hours of footage. She stared at his face, trying to understand what had driven him to kill. One day, she wrote him a letter. It was a letter that never reached him, but she sent it to an address she found, and to her surprise, it came back unopened. She still kept it, folded neatly in a drawer. The obsession wasn't healthy. It wasn't normal, but it wasn't uncommon. The rise of copycats. By 2000, the dark fascination surrounding Bundy had evolved into something more dangerous. It started with little things: disguises, women's clothing, police uniforms, all things Bundy had used to lure his victims. Then it escalated. In Utah, a man was arrested for impersonating a police officer and kidnapping a young woman. His confession was chilling. "I just wanted to feel what it was like, to see if I could, to know if I could get away with it." He was fascinated by Ted Bundy. He watched his trial, took notes, studied his moves. He said he wanted to be just like him. The true crime market. Ted Bundy's name was now a commodity. Every podcast, every documentary series, every article, every book that sold a little bit of his darkness made millions. For some, it was entertainment. For others, it was education. But somewhere in that mix, Bundy's story became something more insidious. A cultural mythology. People became obsessed with the why of it all. How could a man who seemed so normal, so charming, become the monster responsible for at least 36 murders? The Bundy effect, society and its obsession. Psychologists began to study what they called the Bundy effect, the obsessive fascination society had with serial killers. They theorized that Bundy was a perfect storm of charisma and horror. He was handsome, articulate, intelligent. He spoke in calm, measured tones about his crimes, as though he were discussing a business deal. He wasn't just a killer, he was a challenge. The fascination fed into every form of media. Netflix, documentaries, YouTube series, and endless internet discussions continued to immortalize him. As a result, his legacy lived on in ways no one could have imagined. But was it healthy? The survivors, the last victims, speak. The survivors, once buried in the trauma, began speaking out again. Cheryl Thomas, Carol Derringe, Kathy Kleiner. They were no longer hiding in silence. They had spent years building lives, rebuilding their minds, and now they felt it was time to speak, not just for themselves, but for the forgotten victims, the nameless faces that Bundy had stolen away without a trace. Carol Derringe, who had been abducted from a mall in 1974, found her voice in the mid-90s. She appeared on news programs, offering insight into the mind of a predator. She said the same thing every time. He knew who he was. He loved it, and he wanted us to know it. Carol was haunted by that idea. The fact that Bundy had relished every moment of his crimes. The fear, the control, the suffering. And yet here she was, speaking out. Her story had power now. She was reclaiming it. The next generation, the new wave of obsession. As the years rolled on, the fascination grew. Now, it wasn't just adults who were interested in Bundy. It was kids. Young adults. People who had no memory of the killings, but who had grown up hearing about him, or worse, idolizing him. Some saw him as a tragic figure, others as a symbol of strength and defiance. The world had changed, but Bundy's legacy was now untouchable. His name was everywhere, from fashion statements to TikTok challenges, from memes to tattoos. No one could stop the wave. Even years after his death, Bundy had become something he could never have dreamed of, a cultural icon, the unanswered questions. But despite the documentaries, the books, the movies, there was still a question no one could answer. Why? Why did he do it? Why did he kill? Why did he keep coming back to the same places, to the same faces, to the same hollow, empty rituals? The only thing certain was that Bundy was gone, but the wounds he left behind remained. Even the FBI had no clear answer. There were countless theories, but at the end of the day, Ted Bundy had mastered one thing, his own mystery. Liz Reflections. Liz had spent decades avoiding Bundy's name, but now she was forced to reckon with it. Her daughter had asked her about him, about her past, about Ted. Liz had always hoped her daughter would never have to know him, never have to carry the weight of his legacy. But she was wrong. The world had changed, and Ted Bundy had become a part of it. Even now, his name carried power, and his darkness, for better or worse, was intertwined with history. "I can't escape him," Liz whispered to herself. "None of us can." The final grave. Ted Bundy had been buried in an unmarked grave, his ashes scattered. But even now, people still visited. They still left flowers. They still whispered his name. And they still wondered, what was it like to be him? Some monsters never truly die. They live on in our nightmares, in the choices we make, in the ways we look at the world. The culture of fear to thousands. The early 2000s saw a resurgence of Ted Bundy's name in the public consciousness, thanks to a new generation of internet users eager to dive into the darkest corners of history. Bundy's story was no longer just a tale told in books or documentaries. It had taken root in the digital age, on websites, forums, and social media. The fear and fascination with Bundy continued to evolve. But what had changed was the way society now viewed serial killers. They weren't just killers anymore. They were celebrities. Heroes to some, villains to others. But for most, they were a source of twisted entertainment. There was something both horrifying and intoxicating about their stories. Something that made people want to understand the mind behind the violence. To explore the abyss, even if it meant peering too far into it. The Bundy effect, a psychological obsession. Psychologists began to take notice of the cultural phenomenon surrounding Bundy's legacy. They called it the Bundy effect, the bizarre way in which his crimes had transcended criminal history and entered the realm of myth, glamorized by media and pop culture. Dr. Simon Baker, a prominent forensic psychologist, wrote a paper on the effect. The human fascination with Ted Bundy is not just about his brutality. It's about his ability to present himself as normal, to blend into society, to play the role of the perfect boyfriend, the charming student, the future politician. He is, in essence, a mirror for society's deepest fears, that monsters can look just like us. The myth of the monster, glamour and charm. To many, Bundy was no longer just a man. He had become an enigma, a study in contrasts. The fact that someone who appeared so charming could be so horrific made him even more compelling. He wasn't just the face of evil. He was the embodiment of contradiction. People wanted to know more about him, his childhood, his relationships, his mind. And in the midst of this cultural fascination, Bundy's face began to appear on merchandise. People wore shirts with his likeness. They posted quotes from his interviews. They posted selfies with books about his crimes in the background. And Bundy, well, he had always said he liked the attention, the danger of fascination, a new kind of risk. But there was a darker side to this obsession. As the years passed, a new generation of troubled individuals began to idolize Bundy. They saw him not as a cautionary tale, but as a hero, a symbol of rebellion, intelligence, and power. In 2004, a man named Aaron Westbrook was arrested after attempting to abduct a young woman in a manner strikingly similar to Bundy's tactics. His confession was chilling. "I wasn't trying to kill her. I just wanted to know what it felt like, to make her trust me and then take her. Bundy did it. Why can't I?" Aaron Westbrook's story wasn't unique. In the years that followed, there were more attempted abductions, more arrests. The Bundy effect was spreading. Serial killers, both old and new, were finding inspiration in his actions. It wasn't about murder for them, it was about control, power. True crime culture, the rise of the armchair detective. The internet provided a platform for anyone with an interest in true crime to become an amateur detective. Bundy was one of the first cases that drew people into this world of obsession. Forums were dedicated to dissecting his crimes, analyzing his words, and even attempting to decode the clues that were left behind. In 2012, a Reddit user started a thread titled "Unsolved Ted Bundy Mysteries." Within weeks, it had thousands of responses. People started posting theories about his victims, about his psychology, about his possible involvement in other crimes that had never been solved. The thread grew. Bundy's crimes were no longer just a part of history. They were an ongoing puzzle, a challenge for anyone brave enough to confront the dark. The community, made up of armchair detectives and enthusiasts, began to feel a strange kinship with the killer. They weren't just trying to solve the case, they were trying to understand him. Why did he kill? Why did he choose the people he did? What was in his mind when he committed these horrors? And it wasn't just the Reddit community. It was everywhere, from podcasts to YouTube videos. Bundy's legacy was living on through these digital forums. The survivors' voices still haunted by the past. Though Bundy was gone, his survivors were still very much alive. The trauma they had endured never fully healed. In fact, as the years passed and the fascination with Bundy grew, it only deepened their pain. Kathy Kleiner, one of Bundy's earliest victims, spoke publicly in 2008 about how the rising popularity of true crime culture had affected her life. People ask me if I'm okay with all the documentaries, the books, the constant reminders of what happened. They think I've moved on, but I haven't. How can I? She wasn't alone in her struggle. Every survivor of Bundy's crimes had to navigate a world where their trauma was now part of the public's entertainment. Every time someone wore a Ted Bundy t-shirt, every time someone posted a meme with his face, it was a reminder of the terror they had lived through. The dark legacy, what we still don't know. While Bundy's legacy had grown in fame, there were still so many unanswered questions. How many victims did he truly have? Where were the bodies of the women he confessed to killing, but never revealed their locations? In 2007, a team of forensic experts started a fresh investigation into his past, attempting to link him to unsolved crimes across the country. Bundy had confessed to killing at least 36 women, but some experts believed the number was much higher. And then there was the question of the why. What motivated Ted Bundy? Was he a product of his environment, or was his darkness inherent from birth? Some said he was just a monster, but others believed he had been shaped by the culture around him. The enduring nightmare. As the 2010s arrived, Bundy's name continued to resurface. He was still relevant, his crimes were still shocking, and his ability to slip into the mind of the public was still as strong as ever. In the final analysis, Ted Bundy was not just a killer. He was a symbol of fear, obsession, and the fragility of normalcy. As for the victims, the survivors, the families, their scars remained, and the true cost of Bundy's legacy could never be measured in views, listens, or shares. It was felt in the silence, in the void left by the lives he had stolen. Ted Bundy may have died, but his shadow remained. His name still echoed in the nightmares of those who remembered him. The dark does not simply fade away. It lingers, it evolves. And with each new dawn, it finds new ways to be remembered. The rise of forensic technology, 2010s. By the time the 2010s rolled around, the way the world handled crime had changed dramatically. Technology had advanced to levels that Bundy's era couldn't have imagined. DNA evidence, once a dream of science fiction, had now become a fundamental part of criminal investigations. The ability to solve cold cases that had once been forgotten in the annals of time, became more attainable. And yet, despite these advancements, Ted Bundy's crimes continued to elude full resolution. While he had confessed to 36 murders, many experts believed that his true body count was higher. The question remained, where were the bodies? The fact that Bundy had refused to give up all the details of his crimes, even in his final days, created an air of mystery that still hung over the investigation. But in 2012, something changed. The Golden State Killer, a lesson learned. In 2018, The arrest of the Golden State Killer, Joseph Dangillo, through the use of genealogical DNA testing, shocked the world. Dangillo had committed at least 12 murders and 50 sexual assaults over a span of several decades, but his identity had remained a mystery until this new method was applied. What made the arrest of Dangillo so significant for the Bundy case was that it proved something once thought impossible, even after decades of silence. Science could provide answers. The technology that had caught Dangillo now became the subject of intense scrutiny for Bundy's unresolved cases. Could Bundy have been linked to other unsolved murders through DNA analysis? Many believed it was possible, and the idea that Bundy's victims could finally be given closure sparked renewed interest in old, unsolved crimes. The age of digital investigators. While law enforcement had been slow to adapt to the rapid advancements in DNA technology, the public had become its own army of digital investigators. The rise of social media, true crime podcasts, and online communities had created a space where anyone could delve into the mystery of unsolved crimes. In 2016, a subreddit titled Ted Bundy Files was created. The group was dedicated to cataloging all known facts about Bundy, sharing theories, and looking for connections to other unsolved murders. Within months, the group exploded in size, gaining thousands of members from across the world. Some members of the group believed that Bundy had traveled more extensively than previously thought, and many suspected that there were victims that Bundy had never confessed to. Others delved into obscure details of his trial, searching for new clues. It was an obsession, a shared, collective obsession, to understand Bundy and perhaps to unlock the final mysteries he left behind. One member of the subreddit, a man named Thomas Kingston, became particularly interested in linking Bundy to other unsolved crimes. His research took him across state lines, to long-forgotten police records, and to the locations of Bundy's known abductions. Thomas would later claim that he had uncovered evidence of at least 5 other murders that matched Bundy's signature style, but the authorities never acted on his findings. The psychology of evil, understanding Bundy in a modern world. While advances in technology had brought a new layer to the investigation of Bundy's crimes, there was also a deeper, more complex aspect that needed attention: the psychology of evil. By the 2010s, psychologists had gained a greater understanding of serial killers, thanks to the advances in criminal psychology and behavioral science. However, Bundy continued to present a difficult challenge. Was he truly a psychopath, or was he the result of some deep trauma? Many studies had been published that compared Bundy's behavior to other well-known serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Richard Ramirez. But what made Bundy particularly chilling was his ability to blend into society, to be normal, or at least to appear so. He was charming, intelligent, attractive, a man who could make friends, hold down a job, and date women, all while committing brutal murders. Dr. Laura Jameson, a professor of psychology at Yale University, wrote extensively about Bundy in her book, The Mask of Normality. She argued that Bundy's ability to hide in plain sight was one of the most dangerous aspects of his personality. Ted Bundy was not only a killer, he was a reflection of a deeper societal problem. He represents the kind of danger that lurks in all of us, a darkness we choose not to see because it's too terrifying to acknowledge. Jameson's book brought a new level of understanding to Bundy's crimes, pushing people to reconsider how they viewed sociopathy and the psychology of killers. But in the end, Bundy's true motivations were still a mystery, and perhaps they always would be. The new age of justice, revisiting Bundy's victims. In the mid-2010s, law enforcement began to revisit Bundy's unsolved cases using modern forensic tools, hoping to bring closure to families who had lived with the unanswered questions for decades. One of the most significant breakthroughs came in 2015, when a cold case in Washington state was reopened after DNA samples from a crime scene were finally matched to Bundy. This case had been thought to be unrelated to him, but the breakthrough offered new hope. Despite these advances, there were still hundreds of unsolved murders that many believed could be linked to Bundy. But for all the breakthroughs, one truth remained. Bundy was a master at covering his tracks. The cultural re-examination, Ted Bundy's influence on society today. As technology had improved, so too had society's understanding of Bundy's lasting impact. His name was still a staple in the true crime world, but now there was a darker reflection of his legacy. A world where serial killers were not just feared, but studied and even idolized. And in the age of social media, Bundy's image had taken on a strange, almost glamorized air. People watched his old interviews, dissected his trial, and turned his life into entertainment. The public fascination with his persona was both a reflection of their curiosity about evil and an acknowledgement of the darkness that still lived among us. But with that fascination came danger. The true question remained. Were we studying Bundy to understand the nature of evil, or were we simply becoming complicit in his legacy? Was our obsession with serial killers a way to confront our own fears, or was it feeding into a culture that commodified violence and suffering? The endless cycle. Where do we go from here? As Bundy's case became a part of the cultural landscape, the questions began to evolve. What had we learned from his crimes? Was justice truly served, or was his death just another way of burying the truth? The world continued to move forward, but Ted Bundy's shadow loomed large. His crimes had not just affected the victims and survivors, they had affected the entire society. They had altered the way people looked at themselves, the way they viewed their neighbors, their friends, and their families. In the end, Bundy's legacy wasn't just one of horror. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the darkness within ourselves. The real question that remained was whether society could ever truly move beyond the cycle of violence, fascination, and fear that Ted Bundy had set in motion. The end does not always mark closure. Sometimes it simply brings silence, the kind that stretches, unyielding, into the void, until the darkness finds a new way to speak. The final days, Bundy's last stand. Ted Bundy's final days were, in many ways, a mirror of his entire life. A life spent running, deceiving, and ultimately waiting for the inevitable. In the weeks before his execution in 1989, Bundy was once again approached by law enforcement. They hoped to gain further information about his unsolved murders, and Bundy, sensing his own impending death, was willing to talk. But his confessions were not as straightforward as they seemed. Bundy admitted to some killings, but he held back, leaving certain details deliberately vague. It was as if he were playing a final game, taking pleasure in the fact that his secrets would die with him. In his last interview, he said, "There are some things I will never tell you. I want them to remain with me. I don't want you to have the satisfaction of knowing everything." This final act of defiance, his refusal to fully confess, to leave behind a legacy of absolute truth, seemed to encapsulate the essence of Ted Bundy, a man who had reveled in control, even in the moments leading to his death. On January 24th, 1989, Bundy was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. The end of his life was as brutal and cold as the acts he had committed, but his death did not bring closure. It merely marked the beginning of a new chapter in the story of his crimes. The aftermath, a society forever changed. In the years following Bundy's execution, the psychological and cultural effects of his crimes continued to reverberate across society. Bundy had not only murdered women, he had murdered the illusion of safety. His crimes shattered the perception that evil was something distant, something that only happened in faraway places or to other people. But Bundy had brought it home. He had shown the world that evil could lurk in the most unsuspecting places. It could hide behind a smile, a friendly conversation, or a reassuring handshake. For many women, Bundy's crimes had changed how they viewed the world. The idea that a man could approach a woman, ask for help, and then abduct and kill her, that was no longer just the stuff of horror stories. It was a reality, and it was terrifying. The Bundy effect from obsession to understanding. As the years passed, Bundy's story continued to capture the public's imagination. His name was still synonymous with evil, and his image, the charming, intelligent young man with a dark secret, became the face of serial killers for a new generation. Documentaries, films, and books about Bundy were released regularly. People continued to analyze his psychology, trying to understand the mind of a killer who had managed to evade capture for so long. They dissected his interviews, his behavior, and his final days. It was as if Bundy had become an obsession, a subject of study for those who wished to understand the nature of evil. But for all the media attention, there was one thing that could never be understood. Why? Why did Bundy kill? What drove him to commit such horrific acts? Why did he lie to the very end? These questions remained unanswered, adding to the dark allure of Bundy's legacy. The survivors speak a journey of healing and remembering. For the survivors of Bundy's attacks, the story didn't end with his execution. Their lives had been irrevocably altered, and they had to find a way to live with the trauma that Bundy had left behind. Kathy Kleiner, who had survived one of Bundy's attacks, continued to speak out about her experience. She became an advocate for victims of violent crime, using her voice to raise awareness about the lasting impact of trauma. In an interview in 2003, she said, "I still think about him. I think about what he did to me and to the other women. But I'm not going to let him control my life anymore. I'm going to live, and I'm going to speak. I'm going to be heard." Kathy's words were echoed by other survivors, who also began to share their stories and help others who had experienced similar horrors. For them, healing was a long and difficult journey, but they were determined to move forward, not defined by the killer who had tried to take everything from them. The modern world, new faces, new dangers. As the years passed, the landscape of crime and punishment evolved. The rise of the internet and social media had created a new way for people to communicate, for crimes to be solved, and for justice to be pursued. But with that came new dangers. In the age of the internet, serial killers could find new ways to operate, using technology to their advantage. Online predators and cybercriminals became the new face of danger. And yet, the shadow of Ted Bundy still loomed large. His ability to manipulate, to charm, and to hide in plain sight became a warning for everyone who lived in a world now dominated by digital information. And still, Bundy remained an iconic figure in the world of true crime. The fascination with his life and crimes had not faded. It had only grown stronger. The true cost of obsession. Where does it end? As the years went on, there were those who began to question the obsession with Bundy. They asked whether society was glorifying his crimes, whether the constant retelling of his story was truly bringing justice to the victims. One such critic was Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a criminologist who had studied the cultural impact of serial killers for years. In a 2017 article, she wrote, "Ted Bundy's legacy is not one of fascination. It is a reminder of what can happen when we choose to look away. The real danger is not just the killer, but our response to the killer. We must ask ourselves, are we still seeking answers, or are we simply feeding a cycle of violence and entertainment? Dr. Hay's words resonated with many, sparking a wider conversation about the ethics of true crime culture. Were we truly seeking to understand the victims, or were we simply consuming their pain for our own entertainment? The final reflection, an endless cycle. Ted Bundy's legacy was not one that could be easily understood or neatly tied up. His crimes, his charm, his manipulations, and his ultimate death all added up to a dark, tangled web that could never be fully unraveled. But one thing remained clear. Bundy's story was not just his own. It was a reflection of society's darkest fears, its inability to truly face the evil that lurked beneath the surface. As time passed, the world continued to evolve. Technology, psychology, and culture all moved forward. But the shadow of Bundy and others like him would always remain, reminding society that evil was not a relic of the past, but a living, breathing presence in the world today. And so, the story of Ted Bundy continued to echo in the minds of those who had studied him, remembered him, and feared him. His name would forever be linked with darkness. Epilogue, the unspoken truth. As you close this final chapter, remember that Bundy's story is not just about the horror of his actions. It is about how we, as a society, confront the darkness, how we recognize the evil in others and in ourselves. It's about the choices we make to either ignore or face the truth, to either seek justice or allow the past to remain buried. The haunting truth of Ted Bundy will remain with us, as it should, because in acknowledging the darkness, we begin to understand the light.